Hey, so this is a panel on sexism and tech, but I want to start with this. We've been talking about this stuff for way too long.
Yeah.
When are we going to stop talking about it on conference panel stage and see some real change?
Who do you want to answer?
Yeah.
Anyone? Kara, kick us off.
Never. Never.
Never.
You know, a lot of things, I was just thinking about this, because I mean, people wonder where you are on this issue, and I'm like sort of veering.
What, like pro or against?
No, not pro or against, but in the mood and stuff like that, and this has been another upswing in discussing it. And I've decided just to keep the rage going, like in terms of how this behavior has really hurt Silicon Valley, has hurt business, and everything else. And I think what happens is the rage ends, and then it goes back into another thing, and then the rage starts again. And I think the only way to change things is to really continue to get people to pay the price for these toxic cultures. People lose their jobs, like the Uber CEO, or they lose their book contracts, or they lose their status and stuff like that. And so the only way this is going to change is that people start to pay a real price. Companies start to pay a price for what is really astonishingly idiotic behavior on the part of individuals, really.
I mean, a real challenge with that is keeping up the energy, because people just get exhausted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's exhausted on a daily basis, just, being female and being in Silicon Valley. There's always something, I'm in a house this week with, 10 founders from Silicon Valley, all of which are women. And, they're talking about the things that are happening to them at this event, at the evening, night summit things. And you're like, seriously? The Web Summit's one of the best environments I've been in for conferences with speakers and with the attendees, and, sort of giving tickets away to, give people a shot. And it still happens here, with the other attendees.
So you're still thinking never, or are you more hopeful?
I like to be a glass half full. I mean, you can't be a venture capitalist if you don't have some optimism. Because let's see, if all these chicks die, but that one lives, and yet I still want to do it. So there's some optimism, but I think that's, sort of to Kara's point, it's constant attention, which is exhausting, and the only way that works is to share the load. I mean, if something's really heavy, you have to share the weight, right? And so I think what is helpful is when sort of structures emerge or pathways emerge that allow people to sort of load balance, so you can take a break from.
All right, and we'll talk about some of those.
Yeah.
Do you
So I guess it must be sort of a privilege for me to be among you three. It's
very brave of you.
I don't give a damn about a lot of things. So I would say that I agree completely with Kara on the conclusion, but I don't think that it's going to recede at all. I think the magnitude of what's going on is long overdue, and I think the publicity about there are jerks in every walk of life, and I think more of these people that are exposed over time across all walks of life. This is not isolated in Silicon Valley. There's a lot more of it in other, little pockets of people. So I think the conclusion is right, and I think we're just going to see more and more until finally it has to get solved legally.
Right.
I mean, I'm curious. You guys have all been in the Valley for a long time, and we all watched 3 years ago or 2 years ago when Ellen Powell went to trial with Kleiner Perkins. Why didn't this stuff stick then?
Well, we covered, ReCode decided to cover it really a lot. We put
a lot of places covered it a lot, but
well,
it just didn't.
Actually, they didn't at first. It was really interesting. One of the things that the benefit of being in charge of a website is that you're in charge of the fucking website. Sorry, I said fuck again. I apologize. But you get to decide. You get to decide what goes in that thing. And one of the things I was determined to do, and you'll notice a lot of the stuff around the sexual harassment reporting, women, like Jessica Lesson is doing amazing work. The New York Times reporters, all women. Ronan Farrow, a gay man. People on the outside, of the sort of white male straight privilege, are the ones pushing on these and doing an amazing reporting job, because they recognize and are empathetic and can see this a lot easier, and it's easier to see. And so in the Ellen Powell trial, we had two reporters all day long. We did a live blog. We had six stories a day. We're going to do 6 stories a day, because I think this matters. I think it shows an insight. It's not particularly anti-Kleiner Perkins, but it's a perfect insight into the problem. A lot of pushback from a lot of people, and then people really did start to cover it. And my conclusion with the Ellen thing is that Ellen is a complicated difficult, interesting person. And that's a problem for people because she's not the ideal victim. She doesn't make it easy. She has lots of different attributes and parts of her that are negative, and that doesn't play well for the image of what a victim should look like. And so I think she didn't play along, even though she had incredibly valid criticisms of what was going on. And so it was very easy for that team in the trial to take advantage of that. And that's what happened, I think.
Well, and I think that goes both ways too. You have to look at, you know, who the folks on the other side, and you didn't have people rooting for KP to fail, right? Whereas I think with Uber, you had not only someone who is a more believable victim and had, you know, just like very documented, very specific, didn't have an axe to grind, couldn't be perceived as having an axe to grind. And people were rooting for Uber to fail in that situation because, you know, there were many Uber haters for lots of other things they had done, you know, other, you know, pervasive issues. And so if you have a victim that is, you know, someone you want to support or the media wants to support, the public wants to support, and you have an aggressor that people are ready to have come down, you know, you have that, you know, it's that cover of Fortune where you're like this, and then the other one is where you're like this. Yeah, they failed. You know.
And you know, they dragged her husband into it.
Yeah.
What did he have to do with anything? Like that got so much play, and I was like, what does the husband have to do with her career? And I was fascinated. Well, it really does. It goes to her character. I'm like, I'm certain you've been married to someone who's a jackass.
Yeah.
It was really interesting.
It does raise some interesting questions also now when we're looking at the Harvey Weinstein stuff and we're learning about all of the enablers and how elaborate those systems were. And it makes me wonder if in Silicon Valley we should also be looking at the enablers.
There's enablers everywhere.
It's indicative of a much deeper problem.
Yeah.
But going back to Pao and Susan Fowler, one thing that you were saying earlier, Christine, that I thought was interesting was the strength in numbers and how some of these situations, it's easier because you almost become anonymous when you're able to, you know, come forward as a group, and that's what's happened in a lot of these harassment revelations. So I'm wondering if any of you guys have ideas on how to make that easier for women to find each other and come together as a group.
And it's something that, you know, I've thought about, you know, because I've been on the entrepreneurial side and I love data and building databases, so that kind of works for me. But when you look at someone who does come out and, you know, speaks out and sort of says, hey, this is a problem, if you're the first one, if you're the only one, your name is forever going to be identified. Ellen Pao is forever identified, you know, on this issue. And if she wanted to go do something else and not have to, you know, carry the weight, she can't. That weight's glued to her shoulders. But if you want to not have that weight glued to your shoulders and actually go focus on other things in your life, you know, you need to, again, have that spread around. And so can you be part of, you know, I don't want to say class action lawsuit, but can you be part of a community that says, hey, this firm is a problem, this person is a problem, you know, here are the issues. And when you have 10 voices or 20 voices sort of bringing these issues up, you know, like, so whether it's 500 startups or some of the other folks, you know, in the investor community that were, you know, complained against recently, it really was helpful because I think it's hard. I don't know how many people in the room could sit here and run through the names without going and doing some internet research. Who are those 10 women that came forward that the New York Times talked about, right? You probably can't spit those names out, which is great for those women because they can go on, have a career, and not have to be, oh, you're that girl.
Or they didn't have a price to pay. Ashley Judd was at the end of like she wasn't getting the role. So you know, when it doesn't cost you so much, I think that's the issue. And one of the things that I think is interesting is the prices people pay. And Dick and I were talking about this backstage. Is what's happening now is people are paying prices for this behavior rather than just.
That was my point.
Yeah.
You mean the perpetrators are?
My daughter was employee number 15 is known at SoFi, which just went through its own scandal.
Yes.
And you know, I verify she was talking to me throughout the whole time. I said, hang in there, it's a good company. And she said, Dad, you don't know what I have to put up with. And I said, well, life is life. You have to put up with a lot of turmoil sometimes. And, you know, and I think I agree with you completely. Two people paid a lot of prices, and other people did too, but particularly two.
Yeah, and had to, because if that wasn't the case, and you have to also call it out for what it is.
Right.
We wrote a number of pieces about Uber, as you know, around the India rape stuff and
great story.
And some other things, people they hired that turned out to have issues themselves at their previous companies. And one of the things you asked me what I'm really interested in is these non-disclosure agreements that people are required to sign.
So there's a couple laws that are coming out that are the bills that are sort of being proposed in New York and California. Are you guys hopeful that that could actually make a difference?
Well, it should be done by these companies because it does hamstring everybody. Nobody gets to say what happened. Nobody gets to say, this is what occurred. You know, in the case of Uber, they hired someone who had some issues somewhere else, and I told them. I was the one that told them, not their recruiter, not the company and everything else. And so, not that Uber is not culpable for all kinds of things, but they were very much, they didn't know. Like, and so when people sign these non-disclosure agreements, we run into it all the time. Like, I can't say anything.
Yeah.
There's not a company in Silicon Valley that doesn't do them. Not Yahoo, not Google, not Facebook.
Do you see that changing?
Right.
If we keep putting pressure on them?
I do.
And I think it's not just non-disclosure, it's non-disparagement.
Right.
Which is just another way, right? And so, and I've had that situation where told I'm not a culture fit in a very bro-y environment, and then I sign the mutual, non-disparagement on the way out, because if I do that, I'm going to get a 6-month severance. If I don't sign it, I get nothing. Right. And so I spoke out when there was the Justin Caldbeck binary situation. Like, okay, that's the problem. But realistically, I was much more angry about what happened with Lightspeed. And I was very angry that they had a CEO who they told, yes, we'll remove this individual from your board so you don't have to interact with them. But in exchange for that, you're going to sign this non-disparagement.
Yeah.
And I publicly tweeted quite a bit about it. And I had some other CEOs, male CEOs, not understand why. And I said, look, sexual harassment is something that women have been told to shut the fuck up about forever. And that is not okay. And this is just reinforcing that and somehow papering it and making that legal.
And the money is... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
In addition to the legal cost, just think of what it cost the people at SoFi.
Yeah.
I mean, it cost them millions and millions of dollars.
Right, to pay people off.
So you think the economic incentive alone will
Yeah, exactly.
motivate?
Here's a guy who basically created a company that's worth $5 billion. And he had the world in his hands. And just
so to speak.
Idiotic.
Yeah.
And that's the great price, a practical price to pay.
Right, and what's really amazing is that someone said this to me, that a very well-known person, when they were talking about the Harvey Weinstein stuff, it was around the Amazon stuff, but some of the payments, like O'Reilly with $32 million, Ailes, who knows how much they paid, all these web companies pays hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, to get rid of these. And it was a Hollywood creator, and they said it turns out they have money to pay women just to shut up, not to tell their stories, but to shut up about their stories. And I thought that was really fantastic, because they have the money, but they're using it because they can't stop groping people versus like letting women tell their stories or investing in more diversity or anything else. It's an astonishing waste of money and time.
So let me ask you a question. These are businesses that take a lot of time and concentration. How do they have time to do this kind of stuff?
Do what?
Screw around.
I know.
I mean, to me, I really can't understand it.
I know,
got time for that.
Yeah. I mean, life is so short.
Dick, I can't get through Game of Thrones. I don't understand how they have time to grope people all day long. It's exhausting.
But I find there's a correlation. This is what I mentioned to you. A correlation between losers and bad practice.
Yeah.
I mean, I really do think they have their attention somewhere else. Any sound, really good long-term entrepreneur is not going to fall for that stuff.
All right, so one question that I have, getting back to just the general topic of discrimination, and it seems like we all kind of agree that bringing these things to light in the press and a lot of pressure, especially from the media and on social media, is a way to solve this problem. But another thing that social media brings is the backlash. And I know, Kara, you have said in the past that you are okay with covering people like James Damore because we need to bring them to the surface. But a lot of people disagree with that because it's kind of validating these harmful ideas. I mean, can you?
Oh my God, the whole don't give them a platform bullshit. No, that's crap.
Okay, so why?
Guess what we didn't know existed in our country before everyone was surprised by Trump? Those people didn't cover a lot of the unhappiness going on around the country. Much of it valid, by the way. But they keep those voices out, and they keep the Nazism online. Let's not say it because it might upset people. No, let's say it so you see it. It just seems like we're not here to be the parents of our readers. They have to see what people think. They have to see what people said. And we're not saying we don't want to give them a platform is one of the most ridiculous forms of elitism I've ever seen. Like, we're going to keep you from what exists in the
But what happens when he takes that and becomes a hero out of it, though?
And he becomes a hero to some people. That's not really my job. My job is like, I think when you hear some of the crazy shit he has to say, you're like, that's a crazy person. Like, it's much more complex, and the more we push it down, the more we give them fodder to say, the elite is pushing me down. And, one of the things that used to amuse me with him is he's like, I didn't get heard. Guess what? He's been on there's so much James Damore. He got plenty heard. He got heard by millions of people. A lot of people didn't like it. That's the part he didn't like, is a lot of people said, no, that is ridiculous.
And we don't like it.
The part he didn't like is he got fired for it. Well, guess what? He can say those things. He just can't work at Google and say those things. And you can insult Google all you want, but they have standards of a company. You can't be anti-Semitic there. You can't be racially insensitive.
Talent is talent.
Too bad,
Right.
I mean, speaking of not being heard, one thing that I've heard a lot from women in Silicon Valley is that they're now a little bit scared to come forward because they don't think that what happened to them is bad enough compared to some of the horrible things that we've read about Harvey Weinstein or James Toback or any of the other celebrities. They don't think that their situation will get the same pressure and outrage that maybe it would have gotten before all of this other stuff came out. So, I mean, does that jive with what you guys are seeing, and how do we avoid that? How do we keep that going?
Yeah.
I don't know about that, but I do know that there are other pockets of this kind of activity, law school, for example, where professors really put, people are vulnerable in a law school, and some professors are going to take advantage of that. There are all kinds of, pockets of this kind of behavior going on. It's not just Silicon Valley, not just Hollywood, not just New York. I mean, there are a lot of places. And the more uniformity we have about getting the truth out, I agree with you. You don't want to make a judgment on it, but get the truth out.
Just say what they're saying.
Right.
Well, one of the things when you're thinking about the idea of it's not important enough, there is a bright line between someone saying, and you've heard this, you should smile more. You know what I mean?
Or I smile a lot.
Yes. I literally was on stage at a thing talking about sexual harassment, and the moderator said, Kara, you look pretty today at the beginning of it. Now, first of all, I didn't look pretty. The guy next to me looked gorgeous. And it was really fascinating. Those are small little microaggressions. Like, you know what I mean? Like, why was I on a professional stage being called pretty? Then I seemed like a shrew when I said, I didn't take the compliment. Thank you so much.
And then you have to tell them
I don't want to.
what's wrong with it. Yeah.
So there's microaggressions like that. And then it goes to the more ridiculous, someone's drunk and says something to you don't want to hear. Then it goes to really serious sexual harassment. It's the same road, and it's the same bright line of behavior that's just not acceptable in the workplace. If you want to go out personally and call people pretty on the street, you'll take your chances on that one. When you're in the workplace, guess what? Let's not talk about sex. Let's make rules around dating at work, because it happens. Let's make clear rules about disclosure.
Right.
And let's just stop thinking that this is acceptable. There should be a zero tolerance policy where unwelcome sexual advance. It's so. My children, my two sons know this. You know what I mean? I don't know why adults in the workplace can't know it.
Yeah. And one thing that's a little scary about that is that a lot of people aren't making that distinction when they announce these kinds of news, like, this person was caught doing something inappropriate. And I think I read someone calling it the black box of inappropriateness, where we don't really know what they did wrong. We just know it was kind of wrong.
People know. That's, again, I have a teenage boy. He knows when he's wrong. Like, let me just tell you, he just tries to get out of it. That's a different thing.
Yeah.
Kara,
well, that's not different. They're trying to get out of it.
Excuse me, I was just saying, don't you think, and I'd like to ask you this too, don't you think there's been a lot of maturity on the part of men in the workplace?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I think that is the good news that comes out of this.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, my mother was an aeronautical engineer, the only woman in her class, and she was a suffragette. I mean,
So she didn't put up with that, right?
She didn't put up with anything.
So, Dick, as a VC, how do you signal to your portfolio companies that you're not okay with this?
Well, I have never actually
up.
had to confront that, as a matter of fact. But, because of the culture, we have a great culture in our firm. And it's open, and everybody's open about it. I mean, we've been in business now for 40 years, and over 1,000 companies. And we have a behavior pattern. For over 50% of our entrepreneurs come back for the next company they're going to start. I mean, it's perpetuity, if you will. If you have a professional behavior and everything's open, the rules are clear. I agree with you completely. This is not appropriate in the workplace.
Workplace.
Right. Which,
Yeah.
Here's what you can do.
So you can be 10 feet tall or a midget and everything's fine.
So investors can't tell people how to run their company. If we would go run the company if that was our deal, right? So you can't tell people what to do. However, you can look for things in diligence. So, example, when I was at First Round Capital, there was a portfolio company which had an issue where someone brought a weapon to work. And there was no weapon, most 10-person companies don't have policies about bringing guns to work, right? So all of a sudden, guess what got added to our diligence list?
Right.
Show me your policy on this particular issue.
I like that.
And so now, what can we do in due diligence? We can say, okay, what is your policy on sexual harassment and discipline?
Right.
What is your policy on diversity and inclusion? What is your policy about wage parity? And how often you're going to review that? Everyone needs to do what Mark Benioff is doing, because that's what it takes, right?
And can I say one of the things that's really important? They always go, men are our allies. Like, we need men as allies. And it's not allies. It's in the interests of good men not to have this happen at work. And one of the things that's really, and it's not allies. It's their life too. It ruins their experience at the workplace. Also, one of the experiences I had in covering all this stuff, the Uber stuff, is every single woman I know had a story. They had 6 stories, ranging from microaggressions to some really serious stuff. Every good man I knew didn't know. I had no idea, Kara. Didn't know that. Wow, what a surprise. Why don't those good men know? Why aren't the women telling them? Why aren't they asking the women? That's really, to me, the problem. And then it creates a situation where they're predators are allowed to thrive. And that's the problem. It's because it's not an ally situation. It's an everyone problem. And that's where it has to be. You've got to just set it from, it shouldn't come from a woman. It should come from a man. It should come from anybody.
It should be collaborative, actually.
All right, so we only have a few minutes left. Christine, I wanted to ask you, you posted something that I really loved. It was a guide to apologies. And I assume that it was prompted by some of the apologies that we've read on Medium and various posts.
Yes.
Can you explain sort of what prompted that and what your advice is?
Right. So, as anyone who has a Facebook account knows, there have been many apologies, and I will use air quotes because I'm not sure they qualify. There have been many apologies for, I was caught doing this thing, or I was in this article and called out on this list of names, and I've thought about my behavior, and I'm going to get some therapy, but this is my excuse for it. And so, have you ever taught a child how to apologize? Anyone who has kids, you teach them, okay, first you say, I'm sorry. You say what you did, and then you say, what you're going to do about it if the person will allow you to, and, what you'll do to make sure it won't happen again. It is not this complicated, right? That's pretty straightforward. But I don't think I've seen a single apology for harassing behavior that actually met those 4 simple guidelines.
Because they can't imagine how it doesn't affect them.
Right.
That's why. Yeah. And that's the culture of Silicon Valley, is cosseted, I'm sorry to say it, but it's cosseted juvenile white men. And it's just the way it is. And they just are allowed. They get their laundry delivered, their food delivered. They get everything surrounded. These companies are like nursery schools. Talk about adult daycare. And that's what happens when they don't know how to behave.
It's like
you really think how about in New York City?
No, it's the same. I'm only concerned with tech. I agree. I mean, it's everywhere. But if I was covering Hollywood, I'd do the same thing. But I'm concerned with tech because tech is supposed to be better, and they talk about how better they are, and they never stop telling you
that. Is this geographic? I mean, what about Chicago or something?
Oh, there's plenty of people there.
All right. Well,
and so that's plenty of great guys.
That's a little bit of a grim note. We're out of time, but I want to end with a positive data point. This afternoon, Web Summit, which works very hard to be inclusive, this year announced that a full 42% of the attendees are women, which is pretty good, and 35% of the 1,200 speakers are also women. So
good deal.
That's a very positive, encouraging sign. Guys, thank you very much.
Right.